High above the industrial haze, a man runs across the roof of a speeding freight train, while the stranger ahead of him seems to become someone else between one step and the next. Thank you for listening. Leave a comment if this image pulls you in, then follow Declan Hurst into the city beneath the lights. Declan Hurst hit the rail at a dead run, planted one boot on polished alloy, and vaulted over a display of illegal optic implants just as the vendor dropped flat behind his counter. The man Declan was chasing did not look back. That was the first intelligent decision he had made in the last 6 minutes. The second was choosing the freight line instead of the public lift. Declan saw the shift in his shoulders before the man reached the next junction. He was not angling toward the bright glass elevators that climbed into the upper city. He was cutting left toward the maintenance bridges that hung beneath Helix Market like loose ribs. Of course, Declan muttered. Why use a door when there is a fatal drop available? The market rushed around him in strips of color. Neon advertisements flowed across suspended walls. Mechanical lungs pulsed inside clear cases. Vendors shouted prices for muscle fibers, nerve filters, reinforced joints, and memory aids that promised sharper focus without mentioning the headaches. Above it all, 3 levels of pedestrian bridges crossed one another between the towers of Vantral. Far below, the understack glowed through steam and industrial haze. Declan shoved through a curtain of hanging cables and saw his target slap one hand against a bio-key gate. The gate flashed green. The man had entered Helix Market under the name of a dock thief wanted by Greyline Recovery Bureau. At the first checkpoint, the system had identified him as a hospital orderly. Now the gate displayed the face of an elderly transit inspector. Same body. Third identity. Declan did not slow. His license would be suspended if he lost another target connected to this pattern, and the contract required delivery alive. Dead targets paid a fraction. Fractions did not replace failing spinal hardware. The target cleared the gate and jumped onto a narrow service bridge. Declan reached the scanner half a second later. It recognized him before his palm touched the plate. Green. That was faster than usual, but he had no time to wonder about it. He swung over the side rail instead of waiting for the bridge traffic to clear. His boots struck an exterior support. Pain flashed up his back, sharp and white. The medical module locked for one breath, and his right leg went numb. Declan caught a cable with both hands and hung over open air. A freight train screamed past below him. Well, he told the city, excellent place for a railing inspection. Feeling returned in a hot wave. He pulled himself onto the outer frame, climbed 3 meters down, and ran along a maintenance beam no wider than his boot. His target glanced back at last. Fear tightened the man's face. Then something changed. His shoulders settled. His breathing slowed. His feet stopped slapping against the bridge and began landing with measured precision. A terrified smuggler became a trained fighter in the space of 2 steps. Declan had seen stimulants sharpen people. He had seen military implants suppress panic. This was different. The man's whole relationship with his own body changed. The target reached the end of the bridge, dropped onto the roof of a departing freight car, and rolled without losing speed. Declan jumped after him. His injured spine protested the landing. He ignored it and drove forward as the train accelerated between towers. Wind toward his coat. Bright market signs became streaks on either side. The target turned with a metal baton already extended. He attacked with disciplined economy. No wasted motion. No warning swing. The first strike aimed at Declan's throat, the second at his damaged lower back. He knew where to hit. Declan blocked the baton with his forearm guard and stepped inside the third strike. The man shifted styles without hesitation, changing from compact military blows to wide mining yard swings meant for heavy tools. Declan ducked under the baton, hooked the man's ankle, and felt his own leg weaken at the worst possible moment. The target twisted free. Could you pick one personality? Declan said. I charge extra for groups. The man's face flickered with confusion. For one instant, his grip loosened. Declan struck the wrist, drove his shoulder into his chest, and pinned him against the freight car's ventilation housing. He snapped a mechanical restraint around one arm, then the other. He avoided the smart cuffs. Anything connected to the city could be persuaded to forget its owner. The man began shaking. Not fear, a signal. Declan felt it through the metal beneath them, a quick vibration almost too faint to notice. The implants along the man's neck lit beneath the skin. Stay with me. Declan grabbed his jaw and forced his face up. Who is sending the command? The man's pupils shifted between sizes. His voice came out wrong, layered with two different tones. Find Lisa Wren. Declan knew the name. Everyone in the recovery trade knew it. Lisa Wren had died months ago in a clinic fire connected to 3 vanished fugitives. You are late, Declan said. She is dead. No. The man fought for breath. The rest is in you. A pulse moved under his skin. Declan tore at the access seam behind the man's ear, trying to disconnect the implant. A small mechanical plug broke loose and dropped into his palm. The man went still. The freight train continued through the city as though nothing had happened. By the time the train reached the next service platform, Declan's contract target was dead and no longer his contract target. The first scan identified the body as a missing foundry worker. The second confirmed the same identity, but attached a different birth record. The face matched neither file. Declan stood beside the covered body while Greyline placed his payment on hold and marked the capture for review. The review notice appeared on his wrist screen in a calm blue box, informing him that his license status was pending. He shut the screen off before it could improve his mood further. The investigator arrived 11 minutes later. Nyra Keth moved through the station without appearing hurried, yet everyone in her path found a reason to step aside. She wore a dark field coat over light armor, with a compact medical kit at one hip. Fine silver lines traced the sides of her throat. They were natural, sensory ridges common to Orthians, though Declan had never seen them brighten the way hers did when she approached the body. She stopped 2 steps away. Do not touch the covering, she said. I was planning to knit it a hat. Her eyes lifted to him. Pale gold irises narrowed slightly. Declan Hurst. That depends who is asking. Nyra Keth. Civic Identity Directorate, Biological Crimes. That answers who. It does not improve why. Nyra ignored the remark and passed a scanner over the body without making contact. The silver lines at her throat brightened, then dimmed. The implants are still cycling, she said. He has been dead for 12 minutes. I noticed. She pulled back the covering and studied the access wound behind the ear. Her gaze moved to Declan's closed fist. What did you remove? Nothing. Her sensory ridges brightened again. Declan looked down at his fist. That trick does not tell you when people lie, does it? No, your hand does. He opened it. The broken connector lay against his palm. Nyra extended a gloved hand. Give it to me. It is the only proof this man was connected to my target. It is biological evidence from a suspicious death. It is also the difference between a paid contract and losing my license. A contaminated object will not protect your license, and a sealed evidence room will not catch whoever killed him. Nyra's expression remained controlled, but the ridges along her throat flickered. You assume speed and competence are the same thing. You assume paperwork frightens criminals. A faint vibration came from a nearest bio-key arch as it scanned station traffic. The display turned toward Declan, recognized him, and cleared him almost instantly. Nyra noticed. Have you received any spinal replacement work in the understack? She asked. Declan closed his fingers around the connector again. That question sounded a lot like an accusation wearing a medical coat. It is a question. Then ask it after you explain why a dead man changed identities 3 times and tried to kill me with someone else's training. Nyra looked toward the covered body. I cannot explain it yet. Good. We finally agree on something. The forensic convoy left the station under directorate escort, with Nyra riding in the lead vehicle beside the body. Declan followed on his service bike. Officially, he stayed because the connector remained in his possession. In truth, leaving had become impossible the moment the dying man named Lisa Wren. They had crossed 2 transport levels when an emergency vehicle dropped from an upper ramp and blocked the convoy. Its lights flashed valid civic codes. The escort slowed. Declan saw the problem before the system did. The emergency vehicle had clean wheels. Nothing that had crossed the lower industrial ramps remained that clean. He opened a channel to Nyra. Do not stop. Identify yourself. The person who told you this would happen. Gunfire struck the escort vehicle. The emergency doors burst open. Four figures in rescue armor moved with military speed. They fired disabling rounds into the convoy controls, not the passengers, and reached the forensic van before the automated alarms finished sounding. Declan accelerated. One attacker cut through the rear hatch. Another climbed inside with a shielded surgical case. They were not stealing the body. They were harvesting it. Declan drove his bike up the side rail, launched across the narrowing gap, and landed on the attacker's escape truck as it pulled away. His spine module sent a warning pulse through his lower back. He ignored that too. Nyra's voice came through his earpiece. The rail ahead splits in 40 seconds. Then choose the one without a wall. I'm locking the east branch. That one has a wall. It will in 30 seconds. The truck swerved. An attacker climbed onto the roof and aimed a compact weapon at Declan. Declan rolled behind an air intake as the shot cut through the metal where his head had been. He kicked the weapon aside, caught the attacker's arm, and drove him against the roof. The man moved like the target on the freight train, precise for 3 blows, then suddenly broad and heavy, as if another body had taken over. Declan broke the rhythm with an ugly headbutt and shoved him off balance. A signal snapped through the truck. His spinal module locked. Both legs went rigid. Declan slid toward the edge, unable to stop himself. Then another signal struck, sharp and uneven. The lock released just enough for him to catch a roof bracket. Through the open side of the truck, he saw Nyra standing on a parallel service car with her scanner raised. The silver ridges at her throat blazed white. Her face tightened with pain. I disrupted the command, she said. It will adapt. You always deliver good news this gently. Move. Declan pulled himself up as the east rail began closing ahead. The truck veered toward a narrow maintenance lane between 2 towers. Nyra jumped from a service car onto a platform control booth, forced the door, and hit the manual lock. Steel barriers dropped across the truck's planned escape route. The driver turned hard. A blast vent opened beneath the booth. Nyra looked the wrong way. For one dangerous second, she stepped toward the expanding pressure field instead of away from it. Declan saw the confusion on her face. He fired a tether into the booth frame, caught her around the waist with a return line, and yanked her off the platform as superheated air tore through the space she had occupied. They struck the side of the slowing truck together. Nyra caught the rail with one hand. Declan caught Nyra. This is not an approved arrest method, she said through clenched teeth. It is still under review. The truck crashed through a service gate and descended into the understack. By the time it stopped, the attackers had abandoned it and carried their surgical case into a derelict clinic wedged beneath a thermal plant. Declan and Nyra followed through a rear access corridor lit by red emergency strips. The front rooms had been stripped. No staff. No records. No drugs. Nyra closed her eyes. The silver ridges at her throat brightened faintly. There is power below us, she said. Declan found a mechanical seam beneath an examination table. The bio-key pad beside it flashed green before he touched it. Nyra looked at him. I'm very talented, he said. That is not what happened. The hatch opened onto a lower ward. Rows of support chambers filled the dark space. Human-like figures floated inside pale medical fluid. Some were Earthian. Some belonged to species Declan did not recognize. All were alive. One chamber held a woman with cropped dark hair and old burn marks along one arm. Her eyes opened when the machinery changed pitch. She raised one hand and traced a pattern against the glass. Nyra moved closer. Lisa Wren. The woman's file said she had died in a clinic fire 5 months earlier. A man in the next chamber began moving his hands over invisible controls, performing the motions of a transit pilot. Another patient touched the chamber seal in the exact sequence used by court technicians. Echo fragments, Nyra whispered. Skill memory. Motor patterns. They took pieces from them. A warning sounded above. Declan checked the wall terminal. The clinic's last transport record had been deleted less than a day earlier. Then the terminal changed. His own face appeared under a red alert that labeled him an armed assault suspect wanted for biological theft. Nyra's credentials vanished from the access panel beside her. A second warning identified her as an unauthorized investigator and ordered her detained on contact. The clinic doors sealed. Heat surged through the ventilation system. "They're starting an industrial sterilization cycle," Nyra said. Declan looked across the rows of chambers. "How many can we move?" "Not enough." The answer hurt her to say. He could see it. Nyra ran to Lisa's chamber and began disconnecting the life support by hand. Declan tore the storage core from the nearest console. The casing cracked, but the inner data crystal remained intact. Smoke rolled down from the ceiling. Metal expanded with deep, violent groans. Declan found an emergency service cart and shoved it beside Lisa's chamber. Nyra released the fluid, caught Lisa before she fell, and guided her onto the cart. The other patients watched through the glass. One pressed both hands against the chamber wall. Nyra froze. Declan put a hand on her shoulder. "We come back with a way to open all of them. If the heat reaches the lower lines, there will be nothing to come back for. Then we make sure it does not." The outer doors shook under impact. Directorate units were arriving, but the system had already told them whom to arrest. Declan forced open a maintenance hatch while Nyra kept Lisa breathing. They pushed the cart into a waste conduit seconds before the lower ward vanished behind a curtain of cleansing fire. They emerged 3 levels below, soaked in cooling runoff, carrying 1 living witness and 1 damaged storage core. Above them, the city announced that Declan Hurst and Nyra Keth were wanted for biological theft and murder. For the first time since the chase began, neither of them argued about what to do next. There was nowhere official left to go. Lisa began convulsing before they reached the next service level. Every time an arch linked to the bio-key grid pulsed nearby, her body answered. Her hands clenched. Her breathing stopped for 2 or 3 seconds, then returned in a painful gasp. Nyra knelt beside her on the waste cart and pressed 2 fingers to the sensory nodes beneath Lisa's jaw. "The grid is calling something inside her," she said. "It may be a tracking command or an attempt to trigger another shutdown." Declan glanced up the shaft. Security lights were moving across the level above. "Can you stop it?" "With a full laboratory. We are short 1 laboratory. We are also short legal transportation, medical access, and a city that believes we exist." "Good. Then expectations are low." Nyra gave him a look that would have stopped a weaker man. "She needs help now." Declan pushed the cart into a narrow mechanical passage that ran beneath the public walkways. "I know someone." "No, I have not said who. You are going to say a physician in the understack who asks no questions and keeps no records." "He asks questions. He just dislikes the answers." "Declan, Orrin Pell kept me walking after a mining station tried to fold me in half. He has offline equipment, and his clinic does not report to BioKey." Nyra looked down at Lisa as another tremor moved through her. The silver ridges at Nyra's throat brightened, then dulled with strain. "If he alters her before I record the current state, we may lose the only clean evidence we have. If we do nothing, we lose the witness." The argument from the station returned, but the stakes had changed. Declan saw Nyra reach the same conclusion. She took a thin strip of polymer from her kit and scratched 2 columns into it with a metal probe. "You do not trade the storage core, the connector, or information about Lisa without my agreement. You do not call your directorate, even through an emergency channel, until we test it offline. You do not threaten the physician. That depends on his prices." Declan agreed. They marked the terms with 2 small cuts. No network, no signature to steal. The city made them pay for every block. Doors ignored Nyra's former authority. Declan's accounts vanished while he watched. A public medical kiosk scanned Lisa, displayed a red conflict warning, and locked itself before Nyra could access the oxygen supply. Declan opened the rear panel with a manual tool, bypassed the lock, and took 1 sealed breathing line. "That is theft," Nyra said. "The city currently believes I stole multiple bodies and a forensic convoy. I am comfortable adding a tube." She almost smiled. It vanished when Lisa stopped breathing again. They reached Orrin's clinic through a freight lift that had not been connected to BioKey in 20 years. The room smelled of sterilizer, hot metal, and old insulation. Oren Pell stood over a workbench with a magnifying lens clipped to one eye. He looked at Declan, Nyra, and the unconscious woman between them. I charge extra when the directorate comes through the back door. She is not here as the directorate, Declan said. I noticed. Directorate officers usually arrive with more people and fewer burns. Nyra moved Lisa onto the examination table. Her implants respond to nearby bio-key pulses. We need full isolation and respiratory support. Oren studied the sensory ridges at her throat, then the dead credential light on her coat. You brought me a wanted investigator. She brought me, Declan said. That is worse. Oren sealed the room, powered an old diagnostic frame from an independent cell, and passed a broad scanner over Lisa. The machine used physical needles, optical plates, and enough exposed wiring to offend Nyra professionally. It worked. Lisa's breathing steadied. Oren examined the signal pattern, then turned slowly toward Declan. Take off your coat. I knew you missed me. Your shirt, too. Nyra folded her arms. His charm appears to be failing. It usually needs better lighting. Declan removed the coat and shirt. A line of old surgical marks crossed his lower back. Oren placed 2 contacts beside the scar and activated the scanner. The pattern on the monitor matched the pulse inside Lisa. Nyra stepped closer. What did you put in him? What kept him alive? That was not the question. Oren removed the lens from his eye. An anchor core, manufactured by Continuum Biologics. It was reclaimed from a medical shipment after the program closed. Declan turned his head. You said it was a standard stabilization module. It stabilizes. You left out the part where it belongs to a dead woman. I did not know whose sample was inside. Continuum cores were supposed to be scrubbed before resale. Yours was the only unit I could adapt to human neural tissue before the damage became permanent. Nyra's anger sharpened. You implanted unverified biological memory into a patient. He was dying, and you never checked what it transmitted afterward. The transmitter showed no external address. Declan looked at Nyra. I was unconscious during the criminal portion of my treatment, in case that affects your report. She inhaled, and some of the accusation left her face. It affects my judgment. Lisa's eyes opened. She stared at Declan's back, listening to the soft mechanical rhythm of the core. Her fingers tapped the table in a 6-beat pattern. Oren went still. What? Declan asked. That is a continuum initialization sequence. Lisa looked at Declan, but saw someone else. You came back, she whispered. Then she used a name none of them recognized and slipped into unconsciousness. Oren replayed the pattern. She remembers work through movement, not events. Not yet. A warning tone sounded from his medication cabinet. Nyra turned. What connected? Oren's face tightened. The compatibility index. Human drugs are not stored locally. I needed 6 seconds to check a remote archive. Declan was already putting his shirt on. How long before someone finds the address? A heavy impact struck the outer door. Oren looked toward the ceiling. Less than 6 seconds. Gas hissed into the front room. The attackers used valid emergency codes to open the exterior shutters. Their armor displayed Directorate rescue markings, but Nyra's sensory ridges caught the command pulses passing between their weapons and the building systems. Not rescue, she said. They're linked to the same control network. Declan dragged a tool cabinet across the main door and locked its wheels. Vent path. Oren pointed to a ceiling duct. Too narrow for you. Good. I'm tired of ceilings. He opened the floor intake instead, reversed the clinic's old circulation fan, and sent part of the gas back through the front corridor. Coughing broke out beyond the door. Nyra lifted Lisa and guided her toward the rear service shaft. Her official sidearm flashed a denial notice and locked its trigger. She stared at it for half a second, then struck the release pin against the wall, removed the power cell, and used the weapon as a metal batten. The door buckled. Brankeel came through first. He was broad, armored, and unnaturally still. His gaze found Declan's spine before it found Declan's face. Alive, Bran told the others. The human remains intact. Declan threw a tray of surgical tools at his visor. Bran moved with a soldier's tight precision, blocked the tray, then changed in the middle of the next step. His stance widened. His shoulders rolled as if he had spent years swinging industrial hammers. Declan attacked before the shift settled. They collided against the examination frame. Bran countered with a miner's weight, then switched to a fast closed defense pattern. His left hand took the lead, then his right, with a tiny hitch between them. A flaw. Declan hit him during the hitch and bought 2 seconds. Cold line access, Oren shouted. He threw Nyra a small mechanical key and transmitted a partial tunnel map to an offline plate. West ventilation shaft. Follow the old coolant markers. You are coming, Nyra said. Someone has to keep the gas away from the patient records. Declan saw the truth in Oren's face. The doctor was staying to hold the clinic controls. Long enough for Lisa to survive their escape. Declan drove Bran into the doorway, dropped the tool cabinet between them, and ran for the rear shaft. Oren sealed it behind him. The last thing Declan heard was Bran ordering the doctor taken alive. Oren's offline plate carried one emergency contact and a meeting point. Junomar was waiting at the western service ramp in a gray cargo hauler with no network lights. She leaned across the passenger seat and opened the door manually. You look expensive. Nice to see you too, Declan said. Juno's eyes moved to Nyra and Lisa. The old debt covered one passenger. Inflation. It does not work that way. It should. Juno drove before the argument finished. The hauler descended through loading lanes, avoiding every active checkpoint. She used painted maintenance marks instead of navigation beacons and changed levels through freight elevators operated by hand levers. At the entrance to cold line tunnels, she stopped. The water is rising. The city is shifting coolant for the next maintenance cycle. I cannot take the hauler through. Declan looked at the narrow tunnel mouth. How far to your lower storage room? On foot, an hour if the old bridges hold. Nyra checked Lisa's breathing. They will not hold her that long. Juno opened a floor compartment and handed them a compact float frame, 3 air masks, and a coil of rope. Then do not walk slowly. The tunnel water reached Declan's knees within the first 100 meters. Thick cables crossed overhead, filling Nyra's senses with static. She kept one hand on Lisa's mask and the other against the wall. Declan followed Oren's map until a collapsed service gate blocked the marked route. Alternative? Nyra asked. Declan shone his light into a maintenance pipe barely wide enough for the float frame. Depends how attached you are to dignity. I left it at the clinic with my weapon authorization. That is the spirit. They pushed through the pipe while the water rose. A pursuit drone entered the tunnel behind them, its search beam cutting through the dark. Declan reached an old coolant valve. The control motor was dead, so he locked both hands around the wheel and forced. It opened. Freezing water exploded across the passage and slammed into the drone. The surge also struck the support wall. Concrete fractured. Move, Declan said. The tunnel collapsed behind them, blocking the drone and the route back. The shock threw Declan against the pipe. His spinal module flashed hot. His legs vanished from his awareness. Water pulled him under. Nyra released her backup forensic scanner, letting it sink and dove after him. She caught his harness, braced both feet against the pipe, and hauled until his head broke the surface. He coughed and tried to stand. Nothing happened. Give a moment, he said. You cannot feel your legs. I can feel that you are judging me. That is not a neurological function. It is where I come from. The sensation returned slowly, first as burning and then as weak control. Nyra did not offer pity. She looped his arm over her shoulder, kept Lisa's float line in her other hand, and made a move. By the time they reached Juno's lower storage room, Declan and Nyra were exhausted and shivering. Juno sealed the steel door and powered a local heater. No Vyoki, no windows, no wireless field. Nyra placed the damaged storage core on a workbench and began rebuilding its broken contacts with pieces from her remaining scanner. Lisa lay nearby, stable but unconscious. Declan sat with his back against a crate as feeling returned to his feet, one painful nerve at a time. You should have kept the scanner, he said. You would have drowned. It was expensive. So are you, apparently. He looked at her. Nyra kept her attention on the core, but the corner of her mouth lifted. Hours later, the first fragments appeared on the offline display. Rows of victims. Their names were missing, but each entry carried a function code. Nyra showed Lisa one symbol at a time. At the image of a pilot control, Lisa's fingers moved through a launch sequence. At a court seal, she tapped a security rhythm. At a medical symbol, she began reciting dosage intervals in a flat, unfamiliar voice. They did not copy people, Nyra said. They divided them. Declan used Juno's paper records to compare the function codes with fugitives he had lost over the last 2 years. One vanished after passing a financial lock. Another escaped in a military transport he had never trained to fly. A third walked through a toxic refinery without protective gear. They bought parts, he said. Access from one person. Reflexes from another. A clean record from someone else. Nyra found an unfinished transaction near the end of the recovered data. One authorization name repeated across its hidden records. It belonged to Varek Dow, Continuum's former program director. The item was an anchor core adapted for human tissue. The sale location was Glassward. The auction was scheduled for the following evening. Declan looked at the line twice. They're auctioning a replacement for what is inside me, or a matching component. Either way, I would like to meet the customer. Nyra studied the transport marker attached to the sale. It pointed toward a route used for medical freight moving into the sealed lower levels of the city. If we enter the auction, we may identify where the remaining victims are being taken. We may also be walking into a room full of people who know my spine better than I do. That appears to be a growing category. Declan pushed himself to his feet. His right leg trembled but held. We need an identity that still works. Nyra glanced at the red denial light on her coat. Neither of us has one. He looked toward Juno's racks of unregistered clothing, manual tools, and old transport cases. Then we borrow the kind they sell. Glassward did not look like a place where people sold stolen lives. Its towers were clean enough to reflect the traffic lanes. Medical gardens climbed the outer walls beneath filtered sunlight. Public scanners greeted pedestrians by name and adjusted the air temperature to their preferences. Declan hated it immediately. Juno's cargo hauler waited inside a disused service bay 3 blocks from the auction site. She had stripped every active transmitter from the vehicle and replaced the navigation screen with a folded map taped to the dashboard. You have 40 minutes once you enter, she said. After that, Glassward closes the freight gates for maintenance testing. If you miss the window, I leave. You would abandon us? Declan asked. I would honor our arrangement precisely. Nyra adjusted the pale formal coat that concealed her remaining equipment, a quality you should study. Declan wore the dark suit of a wealthy recovery agent trying to disappear before his professional record caught him. It was not much of a disguise. The auction invitation had been built around his real problem. To secure entry, he had to submit a biological sample from the anchor core. Nyra held a narrow extractor against the scar in his back. The sample will identify the core if they still have its original records. That seems unfriendly. It is the risk you agreed to. I agree to many things before sharp objects appear. She took the sample. Declan felt the core respond with a small internal pulse. Nyra had built a signal blocker from the damaged forensic scanner. It would prevent immediate tracking, but only for several minutes at a time. Longer use would flood her sensory system with reflected noise. Declan noticed the device strap cutting across the silver ridges near her collar. He took it from her before she could object, shortened one support, and patted the pressure point with cloth from Juno's toolkit. Nyra watched him work. You altered directorate equipment without authorization. The directorate already believes you stole bodies. This feels minor. Why did you notice the pressure point? Because you keep touching it when you think I am not looking. Her gaze held his for a moment. He handed the device back. I maintain expensive investigative assets. I see. That sounded dangerously sincere. It was not. The auction occupied a private medical gallery with no visible security. A host scanned their invitation and addressed Declan by the false identity Juno had assembled from old freight records. Inside, clients stood beside glass displays containing no bodies, only biological contracts. The contracts offered emergency medical access, clean financial histories, transit authority clearance, advanced vehicle reflexes, and industrial toxin resistance. The room was quiet because the people buying these things understood their value. Nyra played her role with calm precision. She examined samples, questioned compatibility, and criticized the seller's stabilization methods. Declan acted impatient, wealthy, and morally flexible, which required less imagination than he preferred. One contract contained a motor memory profile marked for legal security work. Nyra placed 2 fingers against the sample chamber. Her sensory ridges flickered. "This donor is alive," she said softly. "How can you tell?" "The tissue is still receiving synchronization pulses. It is being maintained somewhere." She slid a physical marker beneath the chamber rim. The marker would allow Juno to follow the sample if it moved through a local freight scanner. Declan studied the guards. Their faces were different, their bodies different, but their stance shifted in the same uneven way Brand's had. One favored the left foot during observation, then switched to the right before any threat appeared. "These people are wearing combat skills," he murmured. Nyra did not look at them. "Then do not give them a familiar fight." At the center display, the auctioneer presented an anchor core adapted for human neural tissue. Declan felt the module in his back answer with a warm pulse. A transport code appeared for less than a second before the display changed. Nyra caught it and copied the pattern onto the inside of her sleeve with a stylus. Vault 9. The name belonged to a sealed continuum storage facility beneath the industrial layers. Officially, it had been empty for years. Declan began looking for the physical delivery route. There was none. No freight access. No secure payment stations. No transfer staff. The chamber doors opened inward, but had no emergency release. Nyra reached the same conclusion. "This is not a market," she said. "It is a net." The lights changed. A low tone passed through the room. Every person with an active implant stopped moving. Some remained standing. Others collapsed where they were. A server froze with a tray tilted in one hand. A client's knees bent, but his locked muscles kept him from falling. Declan felt the anchor core seize. His right leg locked, then the left. His arm still moved because his human neural pathways did not match the command perfectly. The guards remained mobile. One of them stepped behind a frozen client and raised a weapon over the man's shoulder. Living cover. Declan drew his mechanical restraint line, but did not fire it. There were too many bodies between him and the guards. Nyra could move only her head and one hand. Her breathing shortened as the command pressed through her equipment. "I can enter the local control field," she said, "and then create conflicting motor instructions until it shuts down." "What does that do to you?" "The same thing, briefly." "That is not a useful answer." "It is the only one." A guard approached Declan. Behind the mirrored mask, the figure shifted into a compact attack stance. Nyra pulled the blocker from her coat and drove its physical connector into the floor port. Declan saw pain cross her face before the device even powered. "Nyra." She looked directly at him. "Do not shoot through them." Then she opened the circuit. The room convulsed. Frozen arms jerked in opposite directions. Knees unlocked and locked again. The guards staggered as their own implants received contradictory commands. Nyra arched against the floor, every sensory ridge blazing white. The control system shut itself down to prevent tissue damage. Declan's legs released. He caught Nyra before her head struck the floor. Her eyes were open, but they did not track him. "I cannot find level," she said. "Level is overrated." Gunfire struck the display behind them. Declan lifted her across his shoulders and moved. His smart sidearm had locked with the room, so he used a steel display rod as a club and a serving card as a shield. He drove the card into one guard, hooked another ankle with a restraint line, and dropped a glass partition between 2 more. Brand entered from the far corridor. He did not rush. He watched Declan's first 2 movements and adjusted. "Left exit," Nyra said against Declan's shoulder. The left exit was sealed. "Excellent choice," Declan said. "What?" "Nothing. We're going right." "No. The current is stronger on the right." Then left was correct. "It is sealed. That is the detail I wanted you to notice." Nyra's fingers tightened in his coat. You are doing this deliberately. Doing what? Being unbearable. Good. Stay angry. He kicked the manual release beneath the left door. It opened halfway. They slid through as Bran struck the metal behind them. Nyra kept correcting him. Direction. Distance. Power sources. Each correction made her voice steadier. Declan realized her anger was anchoring her to the present. He made sure to earn more of it. The service corridor opened onto a treatment lounge where auction clients were still trapped by mechanical locks. Among them stood a fugitive worth enough to replace Declan's spine twice. The man recognized him. You want a license back? The fugitive asked. Cut me loose and walk me out. Declan looked at the security shutters closing over the exits. He could take the man, turn him over later, and recover everything he had come to save. A woman nearby was pinned beneath a fallen partition. Another client's breathing implant had failed during the lock pulse. Declan set Nyra against the wall and used the restraint line to lift the partition. The fugitive stared at him. You are letting me go. I am busy making poor financial decisions. He freed the trapped woman, then broke the emergency oxygen cabinet open for the failing client. By the time he looked again, the fugitive was gone. Nyra's vision had begun to return. She had watched the whole choice without speaking. Juno opened the service gate with 8 seconds remaining. Declan carried Nyra into the cargo hauler as shots struck the closing doors. Juno accelerated before he had both feet inside. You were late, she said. We stopped to shop. Did you buy anything? Regret. That is free in Glassward. They reached the lower storage room through 3 manual freight changes. Juno then moved the hauler to another level so the marked sample would not lead directly to them. Nyra lay beneath a low light while her senses settled. Declan sat beside the workbench, shirt pulled up, as she examined the anchor core with a wired reader. The auction data had included its original biological signature. It matched Lisa. Nyra ran the comparison twice. The core in you contains her sample, she said, not a fragment from the same program. Her. Declan looked toward Lisa's sleeping form. How much? Enough to stabilize other echo shards. Enough to make BioKey accept them as attached to a real person. So every door that opened too easily recognized her. They may have recognized her authority, not yours. He remembered the freight gate at Helix Market, the clinic hatch, the scanners that had cleared him faster than thought. He heard the dying man's final words again. The rest is in you. Nyra opened the data taken from the auction. A small transfer record showed that the hunted man had attempted to send an incomplete packet toward Declan's core moments before his implants were destroyed. He was not trying to reach you for protection, she said. He was trying to return something. Why? We still do not know. Declan glanced at her remaining forensic unit. Check your own logs. Nyra frowned. For what? Your wrong turn at the vent. The sounds you heard in the auction. You called both overload. They were overload. Maybe. But the clinic knew what you would examine. The convoy knew what evidence you would protect. Someone has been learning your habits too. She connected the unit to the offline reader. The first records looked clean. Declan watched the transmission counter instead of the displayed files. Each time Nyra opened a forensic protocol, the counter moved by 1. Nothing should have been leaving an isolated device. They opened the casing. Inside, beneath the official sensor board, sat a transmitter no larger than a fingernail. Nyra's face lost color. It has been sending my analysis structure, she said. Every sequence I used to test evidence. So they knew how to alter results before you saw them. It can also return sensory instructions. She traced a hidden path across the board. Small ones, a false symbol, a voice, a missing interval. She looked toward Lisa, then away. I signed death findings based on this device. Declan knew better than to tell her it was not her fault. That would sound like mercy, and she did not need mercy. Then we stop letting it decide what you see next. Nyra met his gaze. Your core may be doing the same to you. Probably. My body has always preferred complicated failures. For the first time, she did not react to the joke. What if the memories we trust are already altered? She asked. Declan took the polymer strip containing their agreement and placed it between them. We use things that do not remember for us. They built a confirmation system from physical signals. 2 taps for true, 3 for stop. A slow drag followed by 1 tap meant separate and continue. Every critical choice would be scratched on a polymer. No spoken change of plan would count unless confirmed by touch. Nyra added 1 rule. Neither of us chooses an irreversible sacrifice alone. Declan looked at her. That sounds oddly specific. It is specific because I have observed you. He marked the rule. The auction files contained 1 final piece of information. The city's sync window would begin in 21 hours. During that maintenance period, local bio-key stations would accept cached identity updates before comparing them with the central record. Vault 9 was scheduled to send thousands of new packages at once. When synchronization finished, the buyers would become legal citizens under stolen histories. The original owners would become conflicts. Conflict were locked out of homes, accounts, hospitals, and transit until reviewed. With the directorate compromised, review might never come. Declan studied the map of Vantral. We are not chasing a market anymore. No, Nyra said. We are preventing the city from replacing its own people. The old maintenance shop had belonged to Oren before he moved his clinic deeper into the understack. Its walls were lined with hand tools, pressure gauges, and machines too old to ask permission before working. Declan sat on a reinforced bench while Nyra connected the anchor core to an external power sink. If I cut its transmitter, the stabilization field will weaken, she said. Your legs may lose strength immediately. How different from the excellent condition they are in now. You may not be able to stand. That is different. Nyra looked at him until the humor dropped away. We cannot enter Vault 9 while Varek can lock your body. She said, I know. She touched 2 fingers to the metal bench. 2 taps. True. Declan answered with 2. Nyra turned the power sink on. Pain struck through his back and emptied the strength from both legs. His hands locked around the edge of the bench. The anchor core's steady warmth disappeared, leaving a deep cold pressure along his spine. The external meter showed the transmitter shutting down. Declan forced his breathing to remain even. Successful. You have stopped broadcasting. Finally, some privacy. He tried to stand. His knees folded. Nyra caught him under one arm before he hit the floor. She did not tell him to rest. She helped him back onto the bench and placed a mechanical brace around his right leg. My turn, she said. The hidden transmitter in her forensic unit sat against a sensory junction beneath her collarbone. Removing it required opening the official housing and separating the unauthorized channel from the biological interface. Oren's instructions were stored on the offline plate he had thrown to her during the raid. The procedure had been intended for a controlled room with 2 technicians. They had 1 injured bounty hunter, 1 damage scanner, and less than 18 hours. Nyra lay on the work table. Declan cleaned the access tools twice. If I cut the wrong line, he asked, my sensory field may collapse on one side, meaning I may no longer distinguish living electrical patterns from machine current. Anything more cheerful? I could seize. There it is. She reached up and took his wrist. Your hand is shaking. My spine is offline. That is not the hand connected to your spine. Declan looked at her fingers around his wrist. 2 taps. True. He steadied his hand against the edge of the table and began. The transmitter was smaller than the diagram suggested. It had grown thin biological filaments into Nyra's official sensor interface, hiding itself inside legitimate tissue connections. Declan separated the first strand. Nyra's eyes lost focus. What do you see? 3 of you. Choose the most attractive. That does not reduce the options. The answer was dry enough to tell him she was still present. He cut the second strand. A warning light flashed on the shop's outer wall. Not a network alarm. A pressure sensor Declan had placed at the entrance. Brandon found them. Ow! Nyra asked. Old data. Juno changed levels, but Brand knows Oren's properties. Declan locked the tool in place so it could not shift, then pulled a foot lever beside the table. A chain hoist released in the front room. Metal shelving dropped across the entrance as the outer door burst inward. Brand's team fired through the obstruction. Declan kept working. You need to move, Nyra said. If I move, this filament tears. A round struck the wall above his shoulder. He pressed another foot lever. A hydraulic lift rose beneath the collapsed shelves and drove them back toward the attackers. Bran came over the top. Declan cut the final unauthorized strand. Nyra convulsed once. The silver lines at her throat went dark along the left side. The transmitter fell into Declan's palm. He rolled the work table behind a steel partition as Bran landed where he had been standing. Declan's legs barely responded. He used the brace to push upright, swung a maintenance hook into Bran's weapon, and let the man's momentum carry both of them against the hydraulic controls. Bran changed styles twice in 3 seconds. Each transition brought the same tiny delay. Declan struck during the second delay and opened the coolant reservoir. A cloud of freezing vapor filled the room. Nyra, still half blind, reached the emergency chain and dropped the partition between them. They escaped through the rear lift while Bran's team cut through the steel. Outside, Nyra leaned against Declan, not because she was helpless, but because the left half of her sensory field had become silent. "I cannot feel your core," she said. "That was the goal. I cannot feel your heart either." He put her hand against his chest, still inconveniently active. Her fingers remained there for one breath longer than necessary. When they returned to Juno's storage room, Lisa was awake. The transmitter's removal had changed something in her. Without the network repeatedly calling her implants, the fragments of memory no longer arrived as violent interruptions. They came through movement. She asked for 3 metal rings, a strip of conductive fabric, and an old calibration tone. Juno found the parts among her cargo stock. Lisa arranged the rings in a line, tapped the tone sequence, and began speaking as if describing a machine she could see. "Anchor cores were never meant to replace identity," she said. "They held recovered skills near the original biological pattern. A damaged pilot could relearn flight. A surgeon could rebuild hand memory. The anchor kept the fragments from drifting." Nyra sat across from her. What did Varric change? He reversed the trust direction. Instead of proving that a skill belonged to a body, the anchor told BioKey that any attached skill belonged there. Lisa touched Declan's back. Her hand shook. "My sample entered a core during the first trials. I was compatibility control. When Continuum closed the program, Varric divided the records and kept the anchors. Why does this one work with human tissue?" Declan asked. "It did not at first. Your body adapted around it for years. The human pattern and mine now overlap in ways the system has never cataloged." Nyra understood before Declan did. A valid identity conflict. Lisa nodded. At the central lock, it could authorize the new packages. Or it could force every package linked to the same process into quarantine. "What happens to Declan's record?" Nyra asked. "The grid would classify it as the source of the conflict." Declan leaned against the workbench, "Meaning it removes me to protect everything else." Lisa looked at him with clear sorrow. "Yes, the storage core from the first clinic provided the rest of the plan. Vault 9 held the original Echo shards and the physical links to the local BioKey stations. Destroying the facility would stop the upload. It would also erase the only data capable of proving which skills and access rights had been stolen from victims." Declan spread the mechanical map across the table. "We collapsed the main power feeds. No upload, no control network. Done. And no restoration," Nyra said. "Living people are better than complete records. There will still be legal conflicts. Lisa could survive and remain. Locked out of every hospital for the rest of her life. Better than dying tonight. That is the same choice you accused me of making at the station. Protect one part and sacrifice the rest." Declan's jaw tightened. "You want to keep the facility running while we separate thousands of records under fire. I want to keep only the recovery channels alive. We destroy the command links and preserve the originals. We do not have the time. Then we make a plan that uses both of us instead of choosing which failure is more convenient." The room went quiet. Declan looked at the handwritten rules on the polymer strip. The last rule stared back at him. Neither of them would choose an irreversible sacrifice alone. Nyra was not asking him to trust the system. She was asking him to trust her skill while she trusted his ability to hold the physical space. He studied Vault 9's layout again. The command network and recovery archive shared power but used separate junctions before the central lock. If I break the command relays in sequence, can you isolate the recovery lines before the backup system notices? For several minutes. Not many. No, those are my favorite kind. They marked the plan on a polymer. Nyra would classify and preserve the original echo shards. Declan would sever the control relays and keep a path open. Neither would change to total destruction without the other's physical confirmation. Juno interrupted before they finished. The marked sample from the auction moved, she said. Medical convoy. Lower freight bridge. Destination Vault 9. Nyra checked the time. They're transporting the last group of victims before the sync window. Declan looked at the map. Going after the convoy would cost them at least an hour. If we leave them, he said, Varek uses them as replacement anchors. Or as hostages, Nyra said. Juno folded her arms. My hauler has fuel for one high-speed run and one evacuation. After that, it becomes a very large room. Declan rolled the map. Then let us use it while it still moves. The convoy crossed a freight bridge 2 levels above the coolant works. Juno approached beneath a maintenance tarp while Nyra monitored the victim's life signals through a shielded cable. Declan clipped a rescue line to the hauler roof. Nyra tightened the brace on his right leg. Your core is not stabilizing the landing. I had noticed the downgrade. You may get 1 jump, then I will avoid needing 2. Juno matched speed with the lead transport. Declan jumped. He struck the roof hard enough to send pain through his spine, but the brace held. He drove a manual spike into the wheel housing and locked the steering linkage rather than firing into the cab. The lead vehicle veered toward the safety barrier and slowed the convoy behind it. Nyra crossed by tether into the medical transport. Inside, 12 victims lay connected to one shared breathing command. A single shutdown would stop all their implants. She traced the physical lines instead of trusting the control display. Each patient had to be disconnected in the order their support cycles overlapped. Outside, Bran landed on the transport roof. Declan met him near the edge of the bridge. Without the anchor core, Declan was slower. Bran knew it. He drove Declan backward with compact military strikes, then shifted to a heavy industrial pattern. Declan waited for the hitch and attacked. Bran had learned. He shortened the transition and caught Declan across the chest. The blow sent Declan over the side. His rescue line snapped tight. He hung beneath the moving transport, one hand on the line, legs useless in the wind. Above, Bran began cutting the tether. Nyra finished the final breathing disconnect. The victims continued to breathe independently. She could drive the transport away and save them. Declan's line would fail in seconds. Nyra took the driver controls manually. She accelerated toward the bridge barrier. Bran turned at the sudden movement. The transport struck the barrier at an angle, throwing him off balance. Nyra then released a side rescue cable, looped it through Declan's harness, and powered the winch. He rose past the vehicle wall as Bran regained his footing. Nyra opened the door, caught Declan's coat, and pulled while the winch dragged him inside. You came back, he said. I altered the route. That is not the same thing. Comforting distinction. She drove the medical transport through the weakened barrier and down an emergency freight ramp. Juno followed in the hauler as Bran's remaining vehicles were forced onto the blocked bridge. They reached the external shelter with less than 14 hours before the sync window. Juno had enough fuel to take Lisa and the rescued victims to an old mechanical refuge beyond the active grid. She did not have enough to return. Declan transferred the last of his accessible funds and ownership code for his service bike onto a physical contract. Juno read it. This pays your debt to me twice. It pays for them. You may need it if you survive. Then surviving will motivate me to become financially creative. Nyra took the stylus and added her own name to the obligation. Declan looked at her. You do not have accessible funds. I have future earnings. You do not have a job. Neither do you. That feels unnecessarily competitive. Their shoulders touched as they signed. Lisa gave Nyra the last physical recovery key and gave Declan the 6-beat initialization pattern she had tapped at Oren's clinic. Oren remained inside Vault 9. Varric would expect them to come for him, so they did not build their entry around a rescue bargain. They would free him if the route allowed, but the mission could not depend on Varric behaving predictably. Declan packed manual cutters, line launchers, 2 pressure wedges, and the remaining pain medication. Nyra marked the archive feeds that had to survive and the command relays that had to fail. At the shelter door, she checked the brace on his leg and the contacts along his back. He adjusted the strap beside the darkened sensory ridges on her left side. Neither spoke about the possibility that the equipment would return without its owner. Nyra touched the doorframe. 2 taps. Declan answered. Then they left for Vault 9 with no second vehicle, no official identities, and no plan that allowed either of them to succeed alone. Vault 9 sat beneath the oldest thermal exchange in Vantral, buried inside layers of machinery that had outlived the program it once served. Declan and Nyra entered through a coolant. Return channel connected to cold line tunnels. The passage had been dry on Oren's map. Maintenance preparation had filled it ankle deep with bitter water. They carried no active transmitters. Their lights used sealed cells. Declan's cutters were mechanical. Nyra's recovery key was a strip of coated metal that had a touch of physical reader. The first pressure door had no handle. Declan found the emergency gears behind an access plate and drove a wedge between 2 teeth. He leaned his weight against the manual bar. His right leg shook inside the brace. The door opened 1 hand's width. Nyra slid the second wedge into place. Together, they forced the gap wide enough to pass. "Your city hides its medical facilities well," Declan whispered. "It was designed to keep contamination in." That is a less friendly interpretation. Beyond the door, a moving assembly line carried unfinished synthetic bodies through inspection frames. Some had skin. Others were only pale muscle fiber over support structures. None were alive, but their control systems produced enough current to blur Nyra's weakened senses. She closed her eyes and turned slowly. "2 living patterns below us," she said. "Several more ahead. The machines are masking them." Declan checked the floor cycle. Sections of the walkway shifted every 30 seconds to let surgical arms pass. They crossed by timing the movement rather than using the facility controls. At the 3rd junction, Declan found fresh blood on a handrail and a broken piece of Oren's clinic lens. The trail led to a surgical ward. Oren sat restrained beside 6 support chambers, 1 hand swollen around a manual pressure switch. A guard lay unconscious near the wall, struck with part of a monitor stand. "You took your time," Oren said. Declan cut the restraints. "We stopped for 12 patients. Then I forgive 9 minutes." Nyra examined the support chambers. Each held a victim whose breathing depended on a local pump. The central system had been disconnected, forcing Oren to maintain the pressure by hand. "Can they be moved?" she asked. "Not before the sync window. If this pump stops, they follow it." Oren pointed toward a hardwired safety lever on the wall. "Once the command relays are down, pull that. It sends a physical containment alarm through the thermal exchange. Varric cannot edit it without cutting power to his own archive." Declan looked toward the corridor leading deeper into the facility. "You are staying. I was planning to walk through armed guards while carrying 6 chambers, but your plan sounds more practical." Oren handed Nyra a small manual coupler. "The archive junction was modified. Your recovery key will need this to make contact." The coupler was a simple adapter, but it came from a man who had once worked on the machines. Nyra secured it beside Lisa's key. Declan gave Oren one of the pressure wedges for the ward door. "If anyone comes through, close it and pull the alarm when the lights change." "Which lights?" "All of them." The next hall opened into the frame assembly chamber. Bran waited on the central platform. He had removed part of his armor, exposing thin control lines across his neck and shoulders. Each line pulsed at a slightly different rhythm. Around him, suspended body frames moved in slow circles on overhead rails. Declan stepped onto the platform, while Nyra moved toward the archive access on the far side. Bran shifted to block both paths. "You are degrading," he said to Declan. "So is the conversation, but on the tact." His first combination was the same compact pattern he had used at Orn's clinic. Declan answered with the defense Bran expected, then deliberately let his left shoulder drop too far. Bran adjusted to exploit the mistake. Declan stumbled on purpose, caught the underside of a passing frame, and swung himself out of the attack line. Bran hesitated. The stored reflexes knew how trained fighters moved. They did not know what to do with a man making an ugly choice because a machine happened to be overhead. Declan kicked a release pedal. The frame descended between them. Bran changed to a heavy industrial style and tore the frame aside. A pulse crossed his control lines. His right hand became his lead, then his left. The hitch lasted less than a second. Nyra reached an old inspection console beside the platform. It was not connected to the main network, but its scanners could still emit calibration pulses. She watched Bran change styles again. 3 rhythms, she called. The second and third overlapped badly. Declan ducked a strike and drove Bran toward the scanner field. "Can you make that useful? I can make it unpleasant." "Close enough." Nyra set the machine to the inverse of Bran's transition pulse. The first burst made him flinch. The second made both arms move at once in opposite directions. He forced through it and struck Declan across the ribs. Declan hit the floor. The brace twisted. His right leg stopped answering completely. Bran raised one arm for the final blow. Nyra increased the scanner output beyond its safe range. The machine sparked. The reflected pulse hit her sensory ridges too, dropping her to one knee, but Bran's echo shards began fighting for control. His feet took different stances. His hands changed grips. His torso tried to turn in 2 directions. Declan pulled a line launcher from his belt and fired into the maintenance frame behind Bran. He looped the return cable around Bran's body and triggered the manual winch. Bran was dragged backward into the frame. Declan locked the restraint with a physical pin. Bran's neck lines continued pulsing, but the steel structure held him. Declan could have opened a nearby heat vent and ended the threat permanently. Instead, he kicked Bran's weapon out of reach and broke the control cable feeding the echo shards. Bran sagged, conscious but unable to command his borrowed reflexes. "You should have killed me," he said. "I'm trying a new business model." Nyra crossed the platform and offered Declan her arm. He took it without pretending he did not need it. They reached the division junction with less than 8 minutes before the sync window. Nyra fitted Oren's coupler to the physical archive port and inserted Lisa's recovery key. 3 pathways lit beneath the transparent floor. One carried original echo shards. One carried identity packages prepared for upload. The third controlled the commands sent to implanted bodies. Declan studied the relay housings along the wall. "I can cut the command path in sequence. If I break the wrong one. First, backup power moves through the archive. I will mark them as I isolate the recovery channel." They worked without speaking. Nyra traced each original fragment back to a biological pattern and moved it behind a physical quarantine barrier. Declan followed her marks, opened the relay housings, and severed the command links one by one. The first relay disabled the remote muscle locks. The second stopped the termination commands. The third triggered a facility warning. Varekdal started the sync window early. The floor lights began racing faster along the pathways. Identity packages began moving toward the local station links. At the same moment, sound filled the junction. Nyra heard Declan's voice behind her. "I never needed you after the auction." She turned. Declan stood at the command relays, but his mouth had not moved. Another voice came from the archive. His voice again, calm and intimate. "You were evidence with a useful skill." Across the room, Declan saw Nyra approaching from the opposite corridor with directorate officers behind her. In the false image, she pointed toward him. "Take him alive. The core belongs to the city." The real Nyra remained at the archive port, but the simulation covered her movements with a different body. Declan shut his eyes. The false image remained, projected through the anchor core into motor memory rather than vision. He pressed his palm to the metal relay wall. A slow drag. One tap. separate, and continue. 3 seconds later, the answer came through the floor from Nyra's side. A slow drag. One tap. Declan cut the next relay without looking at her. Nyra continued classifying the echo shards, even while the false voice told her he had already abandoned the plan. Her hands shook, but her decisions did not. The last command relay failed. Every pathway controlling living implants went dark. The recovery archive remained lit. The identity packages kept moving. Nyra checked the central lock. The false packages are already authenticated locally. Cutting the links now will erase both sets. Then we use the conflict. Declan dragged himself to the lock chamber. A circular socket waited at floor level, built for an anchor. Core to be inserted without removing it from a medical host. Varek appeared behind the glass wall of the control room. He wore no armor. He was already connected to a prepared identity transfer chair, ready to leave under a new record if the upload completed. His voice came through a hardwired speaker. You do not have to destroy yourself, Declan Hurst. Your record can be restored. Your spine can be repaired. I can give you a name no one is hunting. Declan examined the lock. I have a name. For 6 more minutes. Varek turned to Nyra. Your device made you valuable. Without it, you are an investigator who cannot sense evidence. Nyra did not look away from the archive. You build a business around confusing function with identity. I understand why you believe that. She did not argue further. There was work to do. Declan opened the access panel over his lower back. The anchor core was integrated around damaged nerve tissue. Oren's emergency release would disconnect the data interface, but the stabilization field would collapse at once. Nyra reached the final classification barrier. To quarantine the false packages, I must sign the recovered patterns with my forensic key, she said. The load will burn through the interface. How much of your sensory field? I do not know. How much of my spine? I do not know. They had reached the point where knowledge ended and choice began. Declan placed 2 fingers against the lock chamber. 3 taps. Stop and confirm. Nyra moved from the archive port to the opposite side of the chamber. The false voices continued around them, but they watched each other's hands. Declan tapped the pattern that meant the anchor core would be used as the conflict source. Nyra answered with the pattern for preserving the recovery archive and sacrificing her forensic signature. Neither pattern allowed one person to pay while the other withdrew. Declan waited. Nyra looked at the original echo shards, at the records of people who would remain alive, but legally erased if they failed. Then she looked at him. 2 taps. True. He answered. Nyra returned to the archive and placed both hands on the physical signing plate. Declan pulled the emergency release. Pain erased the room. The anchor core came free trailing light from its data contacts. His legs collapsed, and he caught himself on one elbow. The module pulsed in his hand with 2 biological signatures that had spent years learning to coexist. He inserted it into the central lock. BioKey accepted it as valid. Then it detected the contradiction. The system traced every identity package built through the same process and moved them into quarantine. At once, the lock identified Declan as the source conflict and began revoking his identity. His licenses vanished first, then his accounts, his ownership records, his employment history. Every official path that said Declan Hurst belonged in Vantral began deleting itself. Nyra activated her forensic signature. The recovered echo shard streamed through her interface. Her remaining sensory field filled with thousands of motor patterns, access rhythms, and fragments of functional memory. She sorted them by the biological anchors already preserved. Heat built beneath her collarbone. The silver ridges on the right side of her throat flared, then began going dark one by one. Varek tried to reroute the upload through his control room. Declan saw the movement through the glass. He could not stand, so he fired his last-line launcher into the manual override wheel above Varek's chair. The cable wrapped around the wheel. Declan pulled. The override turned backward and locked the control room doors. Varek's prepared identity reached the grid at the same moment the quarantine engaged. The chair rejected him. The display above him changed from a new citizen record to an unresolved biological conflict. Nyra cried out as her interface burned through. Declan dragged himself across the floor and tore the power lead free the instant the final recovery barrier closed. The archive remained intact. The false packages stopped. All command pathways were dead. For several seconds, Vault 9 was silent. Then every light in the facility turned white. Oren had pulled the hardwired containment alarm. Mechanical shutters sealed the external exits. Independent thermal safety teams were dispatched through a system older than BioKey and too simple to accept identity edits. Declan lay beside Nyra beneath the white lights. He could not feel anything below his waist. Nyra's sensory ridges were dark on both sides. She pressed her hand against his chest, not trusting the absence where his electrical pattern had once been. His heart beat beneath her palm. Still inconveniently active, he whispered. Her eyes opened. You remembered. I remember all my best lines. You have very few. That makes it easier. The safety teams entered Vault 9 through the thermal exchange. They found Oren keeping 6 victims alive, Bran restrained in the assembly frame, and Varric trapped inside a control room whose systems no longer recognized his purchased identity. Varric had no edited record left to hide behind. The physical archive, the isolated command relays, the living victims, and his failed transfer chair were all waiting inside the same sealed facility. The containment teams worked from physical evidence first. They photographed the relay cuts and sealed the anchor core inside a shielded case. Before allowing any connected device into the chamber, they compared each living victim with the recovery archive. Oren watched every support line until portable pumps arrived. Barely conscious, Nyra used the raised markings on her polymer notes to guide them toward the preserved records and away from the ruined command channels. Declan could not stand, but he stayed awake long enough to see one technician try to activate a network stretcher. He caught the worker's sleeve and pointed to the manual frame beside the wall. Use the stupid one, he said. The technician looked confused. It has fewer ambitions. Nyra heard him from the next stretcher. Her eyes remained closed, but 2 fingers tapped against the metal rail. 2 taps. True. Declan answered before the medical team carried them in separate directions. The small exchange mattered more than any promise. Their senses were damaged, their records uncertain, and the city still did not know what to call them. But the signal still meant exactly what they had agreed it meant. By the time the thermal exchange opened a protected route to the surface Vault 9 had become a locked physical crime scene instead of another set of editable files. For once, the city had to face bodies, machines, and consequences it could not rewrite before morning. Declan woke later in an independent emergency ward beyond the active BioKey network. His spinal damage was not reversible with the equipment available. A conventional brace and external nerve stimulator allowed limited movement, but the effortless stability provided by the anchor core was gone. His accounts were gone too. Greyline no longer held a license under his name. The service bike belonged to Juno under a physical contract. Officially, Declan Hurst had entered Vault 9 and become an unresolved record. Nyra recovered in the next room. Her natural senses still worked at close range, but the broad electrical field she had relied on throughout her career was mostly silent. The Civic Identity Directorate opened a review of her actions. It then suspended her because her forensic signature had been destroyed and her evidence chain included unauthorized methods. She accepted the result without pretending it was just. Lisa and the rescued victims began reclaiming their records through the physical archive. The process would take months. Some memories would never return. Their bodies, testimony, original echo shards, and multiple independent samples were enough to prevent anyone from dismissing them as copies. Oren remained under investigation for illegal implants, but the victims he kept alive ensured the investigation included what he had done to correct his earlier silence. Bran survived the removal of most echo shards. Without borrowed reflexes, he had to learn where his own movements began. Varric remained in custody under the biological pattern he had tried to abandon. Declan spent the first weeks learning to walk with the external stimulator. It responded half a second slower than the anchor core, which was enough to make Stairs personal enemies. One afternoon, he found Nyra in the workshop beside the emergency ward. She had arranged a set of analog meters, contact pads, and mechanical test switches across the bench. She pointed to the chair. "Seat. You lost your badge, not your ability to sound official. Seat, Declan." He sat. Nyra checked the stimulator contacts one at a time, using a handheld meter instead of her senses. Declan watched her adjust to the silence around living electrical fields. Her movements were slower than before, but no less certain. "You built this?" he asked. "Modified it. The standard model assumes bio-key access for calibration." "Unwise. I removed that requirement. Now it is beautiful." She tightened one strap. "That is not how you describe medical equipment when we met. When we met, medical equipment was trying to kill me. Your standards remain low." He placed a small case on the bench. Inside was a collection of offline tools. Mechanical pulse readers, polymer note strips, a compact optical scanner with no transmitter. Each piece had raised markings so Nyra could identify settings without relying on electrical sensation. She touched one of the tools. "You made these." Juno found parts. Oren complained about the design. "I ignored most of him." "What are they for?" Declan leaned back. Continuum operated more than one storage site. The archive contains routes to 3 facilities that stopped reporting before Vault 9 fell. Nyra looked at him. "The Directorate will assign teams." The Directorate suspended the investigator who understands a system and deleted the license of the hunter who can move outside it. "That is not permission. I have recently become less dependent on permission." Nyra closed the case. There was no contract between them now. No witness who required transport. No debt from a rescue. No official duty forcing them to remain in the same room. "I intend to build an independent field unit," she said. "Small. Fine. Focused on biological identity crimes and recovery work." Declan kept his expression neutral. "That sounds expensive." "It will be. Dangerous?" "Certainly. Poorly respected by established authorities?" "I expect so." He considered it with theatrical care. "You make a compelling offer." "I have not finished." Nyra stepped closer. "I want you in it because you see physical routes systems ignore. You change plans without losing the objective. You protect people even when no one is recording the choice. And because I trust you when my senses do not." The humor left him for once. "I want in," he said, "because you make the difficult answer possible when I would settle for the fast one. And because when I could not feel my legs, you never treated me as if I had become less useful." Nyra rested her hand over his on the tool case. The contact was deliberate. Neither of them mistook it for an accident or an obligation. "Then we establish terms," she said. "Of course we do. Non unilateral sacrifices." Still very specific. "No disappearing after missions because you do not want anyone to observe your recovery." That sounds invasive. "No describing yourself as an expensive investigative asset." Declan looked at their joined hands. "I may need time to consider the last condition." Nyra leaned down and kissed him. The kiss carried no debt and no confusion. It held every argument they had stayed to finish, every limit they had learned, and every choice they had allowed the other to make. When she drew back, Declan took a careful breath. "I accept the terms." "I thought you might." The following morning, they left the ward through a manual service entrance because the main bio-key doors still did not recognize Declan. Nyra carried the offline investigation case. Declan walked beside her with the external brace under his coat and a mechanical tool kit over one shoulder. At the end of the corridor, a scanner flashed red and announced that his identity could not be confirmed. Declan looked at Nyra. "Should I be offended?" "No. It has limited information." Finally, a machine with an excuse. She opened the service door by hand. Together, they stepped back into Vantral, where faces, skills, and records could still be bought. What they had chosen in Vault 9 could not be bought. The city still did not fully recognize Declan, and Nyra could no longer sense the world as she once had. But as they walked into the morning side by side, neither needed a system to tell them who they were or why they had chosen each other. Thank you for joining Declan and Nyra on this journey. If the story stayed with you, please like the video, share it with another science fiction listener, and subscribe for the next adventure.